evidence was there to lead to that?
Well, when we talk about what our evidence would be at trial, we certainly start with the idea that if we go to trial, we believe in the justice of going to trial and believe that our evidence would be sufficient. And I truly do believe that our evidence would have been very sufficient to prove all of the counts of the indictment on the first-degree murder as well as the taking and kidnapping of Schuyler. With reference to what I said involving the expected testimony of the co-defendant as well as the physical evidence of Schuyler's DNA on the vehicle of Shelia Eddy as well as the evidence from the FBI laboratory pertaining to the injury to the vertebrae which was found at the scene, which, as I said in the hearing, the evidence showed an injury to that part of Schuyler that would be consistent with having been inflicted by a knife blade. So that, in addition to other witness testimony, we would, I believe, be confident of prevailing.
It seemed like this case was, at least from the outside looking in, difficult, a lot of investigation. How difficult was it to build the case to where you've reached this point today?
Well, in the days, weeks, and months immediately after Schuyler's disappearance, the investigators were very confused as to whether Schuyler had disappeared on her own, by her own volition. Certainly her parents did not believe that that was a possibility, but even though that was unlikely, police have to look at everything as a possibility. And so those efforts in the early days were to try to discount that and then to try to figure out what really did happen. Because the two best friends, as I said in the hearing, had claimed that they had left Schuyler while still alive, while she was returning to her own residence, and disclaiming any contact after that point, that left a huge gap for police. At that time, because those girls were best friends with Schuyler, police had little reason to disbelieve them. Even Dave and Mary would certainly not have believed that the best friends could have killed their daughter. So that was an obstacle in the beginning. But over time, as I indicated, those defendants were questioned repeatedly by police. Their stories hung together for a very long time until late in 2012 when one of the girls, when Rachel Schoaf, added a component to her story that Sheila's story hadn't caught up with yet. And so it became apparent that there was much more to be learned from those defendants.
You talked about the secret. What were these secrets that these two girls had that they didn't want Schuyler to know?
Well, it's a little bit difficult to know that for sure. Some references have been made to perhaps some involvement between Sheila and Rachel. I'm not sure about that. But it's also a little hard to get into the minds of teenage girls sometimes when you have an episode like this and a terrible outcome like this where just everyday secrets seem like they would be life-altering if someone were to know things that girls share amongst themselves. So it could just be any number of things, and so that is what we believe ultimately happened, that the defendants were increasingly distancing themselves from Schuyler, deciding they didn't want to be friends with Schuyler anymore. Schuyler was a drag on their relationship, and so instead of just saying, well, let's not call Schuyler anymore, or let's not have Schuyler on a sleepover anymore, well, let's kill her. And they did. I know for we ordinary people in thinking about our daily lives, It's very difficult for us to wrap our minds around girls killing their friend. I mean, that's, thank goodness, something that's very rare. It just happened in this case.
Marsha, you just mentioned that this is something that is rare, and have you ever seen anything like this, and how do you respond to seeing something like this going on in the community where you live?
Well, thank goodness this is the first of its kind, of this specific kind of thing in our community. I guess the only other place you see it is in other news items or maybe in a Lifetime movie. It really is a rarity, thank goodness, but when you're confronted with it, it is a horrible reality. That will be scheduled, and if we can have our way, I think from my perspective, we would be able to schedule that as soon as possible. Of course, that will rely on the judge's calendar as well as the availability of Rachel Schoaf's attorneys.
Sure, as part of the plea agreement, the other jurisdictions agreed to this agreement. What kind of charges could Sheila have faced in those other jurisdictions?
Similar to the charges here. In the federal system, it would have been kidnapping charges because in this kind of situation, there isn't a federal charge for murder. And in Pennsylvania, their jurisdiction over a murder charge as well as kidnapping charges would be concurrent and similar to ours. As I recall it, and I'm going from my memory, the defendants were questioned separately on several different dates by the police investigators, and toward the end of 2012, Rachel changed her story a little bit in terms of where they had last seen Skylar and where they had left her, as opposed to saying that they had left Skylar in Star City, a block or less than a block away from her home when she was going to walk to her residence. She claimed that they had left her out in a distant part of the county, which also wasn't true, but it was a change from what she had said before, and a change from what Shelia Eddy had said during that very same time frame. And as you can imagine, ears perked up at that.
How early in an investigation did Eddy and Schoaf become the focus of the investigation? How early on did the investigators suspect they were somehow involved in this?
It was immediately known, and I would say, when I say immediately, I'm not sure if I'm saying hours or within a day or so. It was known that Sheila and Rachel were the last, thought to be the last people to have been with Skylar or to know where she was or had some contact with her. And that's because, for one thing, there was a surveillance camera at Skylar's place of residence. There was a camera on the corner of a building, and it could be seen that a car pulled up and Skylar left her residence and went and got in the car, and it was determined to be similar to the car that Shelia Eddy was driving, and then it was later confirmed by Miss Eddy that in fact that was her car, although she was a little iffy about that in the beginning. So I guess to finish up that answer, they were certainly, I'm not sure if it would be correct to say they were persons of interest in the very beginning, but they were certainly known to be people who knew where Skylar was last known to be seen and the people with whom Skylar was last known.
I don't know if you could even answer that. Did you have a feeling you weren't getting the whole story? Did investigators
Well,
feel that way?
Investigators covered a lot of ground, as I said. They talked to many, many people because I believe that there were theories that perhaps Schuyler had somehow been given drugs and had overdosed, and people knew of that and weren't telling. There were theories like that that abounded, and that sort of had some legs because, as happens in a disappearance of a young girl like that, there are a lot of people who want to say, oh, I think I know this, or somebody told me that. And when investigators tracked those leads down, they typically came to a dead end. At the same time, Schuyler's friends were not really saying anything different from what they had said in the beginning. So suspicions may have arisen and abounded, but we didn't really have a break until early in 2013 that was concrete. Well, I know that certainly it is one avenue of gaining information on the part of investigators to look at social media, just in the sometimes remote possibility that there might be something, there might be a grain of truth to something, or somebody really might be onto something, or a lot of times people will say ridiculous things on social media that totally incriminates them. So naturally, police are smart enough to look in that direction, not in just this case, but every other case that you can think of. So clearly, police were looking at those avenues as well.
Was there any, you mentioned, and with a smile, that people do say silly things and incriminate themselves. Was there anything on Ms. Schoaf or Ms. Eddy's social media that did that in this case?
I'm trying to think what some of their postings may have been. There was never anything concrete said by either of those girls. My recollection is that their expressions were, I'm so sorry, Schuyler will miss you forever, things like that, that were totally meant to deflect attention, I guess. I guess I would only say that the right of allocution is a right to be exercised by a defendant herself, and so no one can force her to say anything, including an apology. Certainly from my own experience, I've seen defendants make apologies in that moment. Others pass up that opportunity. As to why she didn't, I can't speak.
Not accepted.
Maybe she thought that the statements by her attorney were sufficient.